Good evening. I'm Jennifer Rabb, and I have the enormous privilege of serving as president of Hunter College, where the American dream continues to come true on campus and online. At Hunter's Roosevelt House Public Policy Institute, the sponsor of tonight's event, we continue to pursue that dream through public programs like this one on both the future and the history of policymaking in our city, state, and country. That, of course, includes, whenever possible, speaking directly with the men and women who have helped shape the policy strategies and objectives that most directly impact our lives. Tonight, it's a great pleasure to welcome you to our second in a series of lectures on government integrity. There could not be a more fitting place from which to host such a conversation than Roosevelt House, the place where FDR and Eleanor lived for more than a quarter of a century and where President-elect Roosevelt conducted his transition to the White House after the election of 1932. If we were at Roosevelt House now, I would invite you upstairs to the library that once served as FDR's transition headquarters. In that modest room, he and his advisors did nothing less than fashion the building blocks of what became the New Deal. If ever there was a defining moment for integrity in government, it was the work that this wealthy aristocrat did to rescue the struggling Americans suffering the devastation of the Great Depression. With that legacy in mind, we could not be more pleased to welcome you virtually to this sacred space. We are so grateful for the guidance, friendship, and financial support of Chris McNichol, a very special member of the Roosevelt House community who not only conceived of this important series on government integrity, but has made it a reality through his philanthropy. Tonight, we focus on the life and career of a transformational public official, the former Attorney General of New York State, Robert Abrams. Bob's life exemplifies the commitment to government integrity that Chris had in mind when he conceived this series. Through his dedication to justice for New Yorkers, Bob Abrams helped turn his office into the major force for protecting citizens' rights that it is today. Because of his persistent and determined work over the course of a decade and a half of service as an AG, New Yorkers enjoy many of their most treasured liberties. To name just a few, Bob Abrams' landmark victories for the environment helped to launch the modern environmental movement. His defense of women's rights helped protect the right to choose. And Bob's work on behalf of the LGBTQ community helped pave the way for marriage equality. In short, Bob led the Attorney General's office with conviction, strength, determination, and, of course, integrity. You may know that attorneys generals are entitled by tradition to be addressed for life as general. And while he doesn't particularly like that title, Bob, we can't help to use it tonight. For your commanding leadership, we salute you. And we welcome you this evening to discuss your inspiring new memoir called The Luckiest Guy in the World, My Journey in Politics. Generously turning your life story into an encouraging lesson for the next generation of public servants, Bob wrote The Luckiest Guy in the World to allow readers inside the process of progress, providing a first-hand account of how change is made. Along the way, readers are treated to detailed accounts of interactions with iconic contemporaries like George McGovern, Mario Cuomo, Ed Koch, Robert Moses, Cesar Chavez, and Shirley Chisholm. Bob also explores his 3 consequential terms in the state assembly and another 3 as president of his own beloved borough, the Bronx, the one-time home of Hunter College. Just as importantly, he offers vivid recollections of the turbulent Vietnam era that helped to shape the values that would make him not just the pride of his borough, but one of the most influential attorneys general in the state's history. As has been pointed out in at least one of the many glowing blurbs for the book by none other than former Mayor Michael Bloomberg, Bob always led with the values that we need more of in government: integrity, decency, and courage. He may be lucky, but we, the people, are luckier still. Here at Roosevelt House, we feel lucky as well. We are lucky and grateful that Chris McNichol agreed to lead this conversation tonight. A few years ago, we had the pleasure of hosting Chris for a conversation on his wonderful book, Bloomberg, A Billionaire's Ambition, exploring the mayor's work as a businessman, environmentalist, philanthropist, and as well as his own focus on integrity as a government leader. Chris's other books include To Be Mayor of New York, Ethnic Politics in the City, and The Power of the Mayor, David Dinkins, 1990 to 1993. Chris's writing on finance, politics, and history has appeared in many newspapers and magazines, and for many years he served as the treasurer of the American Historical Association. In more than 2 decades in the business world, Chris served in leadership positions at some of the world's leading financial services firms, and in recent years, he has been crisscrossing the globe in a sailboat with no crew, just Chris and his husband, Fred. Chris, we can't wait to read the book about that adventure. Chris, your support truly helps us fulfill the promise of Hunter's historic motto, Mihi Cora Futuri, the care of the future is mine. And now it is my sincere pleasure to welcome to the virtual Roosevelt House stage the former Attorney General of New York, Robert Abrams, in conversation with Chris McNichol. Chris, I'm delighted to hand you the mic.
Well, thank you so much, Jennifer. It's a pleasure to be here for another exciting event here at Roosevelt House. General Abrams, we're going to use that term tonight. As Jennifer reminded us, you're entitled to be called that. Welcome. Nice to see you.
Thank you. I warned you. You know, I'm Bob, but do as you please.
Well, all right, but you know, if our colleagues will put up the first photograph that we've selected of you, I think people will agree that you were always meant to be a general. This is Bob Abrams. Shortly after he was born, I guess you're 5 years old. You were born in 1938. You grew up in the Bronx, Bob. Grandson of immigrants and the child of store owners. And I think we have a picture of your parents in their store as well. Maybe we can show that to the audience. Sort of an
Chris,
iconic...
let's stop there for a second, if I may. So,
please, go ahead.
I mean, I just love this photo. To me, it's an iconic photo in so many ways. For me, just personally, because it's my mom and dad in the store when my sister and I, you know, grew up and have such memories. But for the world at large too, take a look at the left, and you'll see that a pastrami sandwich costs 40 cents. I mean, I think you could go some places in New York and it might be 15 or 20 bucks. Then look to, on the left-hand side of the screen, it's my dad's right hand. And if you look closely, you can see his perennial cigar. Mm-hmm. My dad smoked about 10 or 12 cigars a day. And then my mom is making a soda. And for those who lived in the Bronx, lived in New York, when I say she's making an egg cream, I think they'll understand what I'm talking about.
Right. And we all know there's no egg and there's no cream in an egg cream.
Exactly. People say, well, why was it called an egg cream? He said, because it has no egg and no cream. That's why.
But Bob, let's stick with it. How did growing up in the environment you grew up in the Bronx in those days, how did that affect the way you thought about governing when you became an important elected official, an assemblyman, borough president, and attorney general? What was the philosophy that you grew up with?
Well, first of all, let me just say about growing up in the Bronx. I mean, it's special. It's very, my wife was born in Brooklyn and raised for the most part in Long Island. And she just marvels over the course of our 46 years of marriage, how when I come across somebody who was a Bronxite, the camaraderie, the kind of messaging that takes place, you know, the recollections. So there's love for those who grew up in the Bronx, still with those neighborhoods. I mean, there are associations all over the country. In Florida, people get together in diners and they have formal dinners, and there are alumni associations and block association and community groups that form, you know, just to make sure that remain alive, the memories of the time spent, you know, when we were all growing up in the Bronx. So there's something very special that went on in those neighborhoods, and there are many neighborhoods in the Bronx. I cite them in the book because people are going to read the book who are not from the Bronx, and they should understand that the Bronx is a pretty big place. When I was borough president, I'd use the litany. The Bronx has a population larger than 15 states in the Union, larger than 4 bigger than every city in America, but 4, bigger than nations that have membership in the United Nations. So it's a huge place with like 35 different neighborhoods. And no matter where you grew up, in what neighborhood, you still have the same feeling, love for the Bronx. So the Bronx is very, very special. And, growing up in my household and in my family was special too, and had an impact on me, as you alluded. My parents were born here in the United States, but their parents were immigrants. They came from Russia. Uh, they came from a land and a life of oppression. Tsarist Russia was brutal to a lot of people and a lot of communities, and the Jewish community in particular. There were pogroms, and people had to live in certain areas, and they didn't have freedoms. They couldn't have certain types of jobs, and it was very restrictive. So they come to this country. They called it the Golden Medina. They come to this country, feeling that they're the most blessed people in the world. This land of opportunity, this golden land, the Golden Medina. And so they had views and attitudes about the greatness of this country, the bounty of this country, and they were for the little guy, because they were the little guy in Russia, they're in Eastern Europe. And so they told me about, my grandparents came here, about sweatshops and how they felt very deeply about how people were being unfairly treated because of bad working conditions and poor salaries. And so, I had a labor union orientation, and I was told constantly about, battling for the underdog and the little guy. And that, I think, influenced who I am, who I became, my sense of values. And it influenced me in terms of my leaning and decision-making when I was in public life.
When you first got into politics, you were part of the reform movement. Many New Yorkers remember in the late 1950s, early 1960s, there was a movement of young aspiring politicians that fancied themselves as reformers in opposition to the bosses, the people that were in control. And that's often presented as a battle between moral reformers and venal bosses. And yet the other way to think about it, it was a group of aspiring, young, well-educated, more often than not in those days, Jewish politicians who were looking for their turn in power against more working class, Irish, Italian, older Jewish politicians who were in power. How should we be thinking about that? Was it really a moral battle, or was it just a changing of the guard?
Well, it was both. And first of all, Chris, I think it was broader than that. It was just not limited to members of the Jewish community. So, for example, in the Bronx, when I got elected, there were 5 independent reform assemblymen who went to Albany as part of the Bronx delegation. And the one adjacent to me was an assemblyman, Tony Stella, who I became a real friend. The two of us bonded and we became real friends. And so in the Italian community, as well as in the Jewish community, there was Lou Benza, who ran for city council and became my deputy borough president. Tommy Cartelli, who ran for judge. Joe Cascione, who was the head of the Bronx Reform Movement. So down in the South Bronx, in the Hispanic and the African American community, you had independents running, people who affiliated with the banner of reform. The 5 members of the Bronx delegation, it was myself, Tony Stella, Cy Posner, and from the South Bronx, Bobby Garcia and Sal Almeida, both from the Hispanic community, the Puerto Rican community. So, it was a feeling and an attitude that the bosses, the machines, New York City is a very democratic city. First of all, people don't understand this too, that even though New York is a very democratic city, New York City, the state in those days was a swing state. It was a very big Republican heartland upstate. And in fact, I became the first Democrat elected attorney general in New York State in 40 years, 40 years. So the point is that there were entrenched machines in Brooklyn, in Queens, in the Bronx. And what do we mean by the machine? Well, the Democrats were the dominant party. If you ran on the Democratic line, you were the winner. It was virtually you know, you were crowned the moment you got the nomination. We called them in the old days Pavlovian Democrats. They started with the star at the top and they went all the way down. They voted the entire line. And so these bosses and machines, there were abuses emerging, no-show jobs. What's a no-show job? People would get a patronage appointment. If you were a loyal member of the club, you might get a job on the payroll of a member of Congress, a member of the state legislature, a member of the city council. And some of those jobs were no-show jobs. You'd never show up. You'd never appear. You'd just get your paycheck. That obviously was a horrible abuse. And nominations being doled out to cronies, you know, people who were nominated for judgeships or for seats in the legislature or a public or party office. And so and it was closed. The door was not open for everybody. So there was a big effort and opportunity for all folks, you know, to say, hey, the Democratic Party has wonderful values, fighting for the ordinary guy, trying to get the bounty of this country spread as wide as possible. So, you know, let's try to end some of these abuses that are there. Let's fight for the banner of reform. And there were two octogenarians who were leading the fight at that time. Eleanor Roosevelt, appropriately so, given the sponsorship of this event tonight, and Herbert Lehman, two elderly 80-year-old types saying, let's get some younger people in there, let's open the doors, let's get some fresh air into the Democratic Party and into the neighborhoods of New York.
Well, people who study the history of that era talk about how energetic Herbert Lehman and Eleanor Roosevelt were despite their years. One might very well say the same about you these days, Bob. You're still animated. It's obvious you still have energy for this. You talk about the Republicans and Republican influence in New York State in those days. And right now, we seem to have a lot of trouble to get Democrats and Republicans to work together on anything. But you tell a story in your book about working on a particular piece of legislation. You needed some help from the Republican leader of the state Senate, Warren Anderson. I think we have a picture of you and him on the dais behind Hugh Carey. That's Warren Anderson all the way on the right of people's screen. It's Bob Abrams, second from the left on people's screen, and Hugh Carey talking with Mario Cuomo, the lieutenant governor at the time, and Ned Regan, the controller. Also up there, Stanley Fink was the assembly speaker on the far left. But you were able to get Warren Anderson, the Republican leader of the Senate, to cooperate with you on a piece of legislation. Was that unusual even back then? Was it more typical for Republicans and Democrats to work together? Tell us about that, Bob.
Well, first of all, I was a freshman legislator. I introduced a bunch of bills. And one of the bill in question here, one of the bills was based upon an article that I read in a magazine. It talked about how thousands of people every year got severely injured in New York State when they walked through a glass door. It was a glass panel, a glass door, and it was not marked in any way. Somebody didn't realize it was glass, and boom, they crashed into it and was severely injured, disfiguring lifetime scars on the face, other parts of the body. And I said to myself when I read that, because the article talked about how some states sought to protect the public against that peril by requiring any owner of property that had a glass door to have a marking on it. So I introduced a bill that said that if you were an owner of property and you had a glass panel, you had to have a marking reasonably calculated to warn, some kind of a decal. And if you look around today at the doors and stores of banks or in office buildings, you'll see various kinds of decals, the name, the address of the store, the logo of the institution involved, et cetera, et cetera. And it was not overly oppressive. We didn't dictate how you had to mark it. Any kind of marking reasonably calculated to warn. So I get the bill passed. I get it reported out of committee. I get it passed in my house in the assembly. And I'm watching it on the calendar. And one day it gets starred, which means the kiss of death has come to that bill. It's never going to see the light of day in the Senate. because it got reported out of the Senate committee, but it was heading for the floor, but it got starred. So I say, let me go visit Warren Anderson, a very distinguished man, Republican leader, majority leader in the state Senate from Binghamton, long time senior veteran of the legislative process. And I say, Senator Anderson, I don't know if we ever met or you know me. I'm a new member of the legislature. I'm from the Bronx, Bob Abrams. I have this bill, and I said, can you please have it released and reported to the floor of the Senate so that it can be debated? And I think it's very important. It's not the most monumental piece of legislation in the world. I'm not going to win the Congressional Medal of Honor if it gets passed, or I'm not going to have my face on the monuments in South Dakota, but it's an important public interest piece of legislation. And I say, and I knew that Warren Anderson, the Republican Party, they were very tight with banks and insurance companies. And I said, and it's supported by the insurance industry. He said, well, tell me about that. What do you mean? I said, well, a lot of people get injured and they make claims against insurance companies because property owners are insured and they have to pay millions of dollars out to people, to the victims of this kind of a problem. And so insurance companies are very vigorously supporting this legislation. So, well, get me copies. How do I know that? I said, well, I have letters. I have letters of support, enthusiastic letters of support. He said, well, get me copies of it and let me think about it. And I raced to my office. I got him copies of the letter, and lo and behold, the bill got reported out. It was passed. It was signed by the governor, Nelson Rockefeller, and it's been the law for the last number of decades. And I think it's been a good piece of legislation. It's helped people. But to your point, here was a Republican willing. I did say, and look, Senator Anderson, it doesn't threaten, the Republican Party, because my Republican opponent is not going to win in the Bronx. It's always a landslide victory for a Democratic candidate, for somebody running for the state assembly or state senate, and so it really doesn't threaten Republican interests. But the point is, he listened, he was gracious, he was nice, as opposed to the kind of toxic atmosphere that exists in legislative bodies in the Congress today. I'm just appalled at what happens. You see a lot of retirements for a lot of reasons today by members of the House and the Senate. And I think in part there's frustration. Nothing gets done. There's stalemate. There's no working together. There's no cooperation. And of course, the public is the loser in that process because nothing happens, in terms of the good legislation that has been introduced, which is worthy of passage.
Well, it seems it was surely a different time, and yet in some ways it seems that some things are more similar than different, maybe. We hear a lot about public behavior in Albany these days, and a lot of what we hear isn't great, that the people up in Albany don't behave in the way that we'd like our public officials to. Was it like that back when you were in Albany? Has it changed? And as Attorney General, at a later stage of your career, your budget was controlled ultimately by the legislature, and yet you had to deal with ethical lapses. How did you manage through that when you were up in Albany?
Well, over the last number of years, there was a period there where it was just absolutely appalling. A few years ago, I think the number was 25 members of the legislature were either under investigation, under indictment, or convicted. Mm-hmm. It was horrendous. Yeah. I think we've begun to turn that corner a little bit. So that was quite different from my day. Not that the things were perfect then, because there were abuses there in the legislature. I think you have these endemic problems and endemic issues. And one of the reasons why people join the fray and why I encourage young people, I've been asked by the Attorney General again to speak in a few weeks to the summer interns in the Attorney General's office. And each year I've been lucky enough to be invited by the incumbent Attorney General, whoever he or she may be. And I try to tell them, you got to not drop out. You got to roll up your sleeves, get involved. The country, the process needs young people who are filled with energy and enthusiasm and idealism. They can't get turned off by, what they read sometimes in the newspaper by the one who betrays the public trust. Obviously, nothing is perfect, and politics certainly is far from being perfect. But in my life and career, most of the people who I worked with were able, decent, honest people, men and women who were trying to do good, trying to improve the society and the lives of people. So, it's a struggle today. And obviously, I have I have a point of view and a vantage point of, the Trump years as being a horrific period in the history of this country, enough to turn people off the kind of lies and the big lie that continues to this very day, that Joe Biden didn't win the election. So there's enough to turn people off, but I think you got to go the other way. This is a great country. It's a great society. It's a great conceptual framework. It's not perfect. None of us are perfect. No institution is perfect. And this country, no country is perfect. This is the best in the world, but it's far from perfect. So get involved so that you can apply your own values, your own energy, to make improvements. In my community, Jewish community, there's a concept called tikkun olam. It's the obligation of every member of the community to help repair the world, to make this world a better place. And that's what I try to tell those young lawyers, law students, get involved in politics, get involved in government, get involved in not-for-profit work, run for office yourself one day. I mean, I try to give them an example. I mean, I never thought I would run for office. It was not preordained for me. It was not a game plan that I had. I talk about how life is serendipitous. You never know how you're going to meet your mate. You never know, what's going to happen next in life. And it was a crazy circumstance that got me into politics. But here I was, 2 years out of law school, 27 years old, challenging one of the most powerful people in the state legislature, the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, as a young upstart reformer. And lo and behold, I was underfunded. I didn't know the right people. I didn't have powerful interests behind me, but I waged a real grassroots campaign. And lo and behold, I won and was the biggest upset in the state. And it started me on a 28-year career in public life.
Well, it is quite a story. It's quite a journey you've had. I believe you when you say you're the luckiest guy in the world. You talk like it. You certainly sound like it. And you went from being the assembly to being the Bronx Borough president. You were elected in 1969, served for 9 years. What do you think were your most important accomplishments in that stage of your great journey?
So being borough president was a big challenge. I served 3 terms in the state legislature. That was state government. And so now I was being given the opportunity to serve the people of the Bronx in municipal government, in city government. And the Bronx was a very diverse place with different kinds of people, ethnically, economically, different neighborhoods. It was very, very exciting. And I try to do a number of things. I guess one of the main things that I try to do, and hopefully I achieved, was having people involved, the participatory process, get them involved in communal work by serving on a community board, an unsalaried position that would have important decision-making powers in terms of advising the borough president, the city government, the city council about what to do in terms of the direction of the community and priorities for the funding of projects, capital projects within their district. And so I got people actively involved by participating in government. And once they were on the community board, by participating in the development of the budget for their neighborhoods, for their community board district, getting them to come to, first of all, establish priorities, then to come to the Board of Estimate in large numbers to testify, fortifying me as I inside the Board of Estimate for my district, for my borough, for my constituents. I would say, look at the hundreds of people who came down to testify. You heard the desperate need for a new South Bronx High School, which we got, or the desperate need for the first time ever for a museum in the Bronx. And we got the Bronx Museum of the Arts. We got 25 new intermediate rehabilitated or brand new intermediate and elementary schools and libraries and firehouses and police stations. And I know, Chris, you live in a community called Riverdale, and for years on the drawing board was Seton Park. It was just a conceptual design, an architect's design, and I got it built. So a new Seton Park and ice skating rinks and Pelham Bay Park and St. James Park. And so there were a lot of capital projects that I was able to do, but trying to bring people together perhaps was one of the most important things. I helped recreate a notion called Bronx Day, which emerged into Bronx Week, bringing all the neighborhoods together to participate in a grand parade down the Grand Concourse and to show off all the great social services and infrastructure that there were, the institutions of higher education, all the great facilities that there are in the Bronx that many people in the world don't know about, show them off during the course of Bronx Day. So it was trying to unify, trying to bring people together. There was a lot of suspicion and finger pointing. Your neighborhood, your district, your community board district gets more than mine. Why? Is that true? And opening up the process, creating a youth commission. I was the youngest borough president ever elected at that time as borough president, and I wanted to give young people a chance to advise elected officials like myself. So it was this whole notion of participation and involvement that I tried to bring to the various neighborhoods of the Bronx.
And you went from representing the Bronx, which is already, as you pointed out earlier, a very large geographical place, a huge population, over 1.5 million people at the time. And you went from that to representing New York State, roughly 20 million people at the time. I'd like to read something that you wrote about serving as Attorney General, something you wrote in your introduction. I'm just going to read it word for word. It said that you helped transform the office of Attorney General into a powerful protector of people's rights, which were being eroded by the policies of the Reagan administration, and that your actions established the basis for similar efforts by today's attorneys general in the era of Trump. So tell us about that.
Okay, so I get elected Attorney General in 1978, and Ronald Reagan gets elected president in 1980. And, a lot of people complain about politicians. They make promises and they don't keep their promises. So Ronald Reagan gets elected and he made a lot of promises. And he was a man of his word. He kept his promises. One of his promises was laissez-faire government. Get the government off the back of the business community. And so he instituted a policy and appointed people who would not enforce federal laws. The Federal Trade Commission, the Antitrust Division, consumer protection, environmental protection. None of this was being enforced. Laws that had been on the books for decades or centuries were not being enforced. And so people came to the states. They came to state attorneys general and said, we need help. Businesses came saying, look, there's anti-competitive behavior. The antitrust laws are being violated. You got to come and help me. It's unfair competition. Look at that guy, my competitor. He's doing something that's wrong. And so when the federal government put the watchdog to sleep, people, sought alternatives. And I happened to be Attorney General at that time. I was the Attorney General of a large state. And I eventually, a couple of years later, became the president of the National Association of Attorneys General. So I reached out to my colleagues in a nonpartisan way, to Republicans as well as Democrats, to attorneys general from small states as well as large states, saying, we have an obligation. We got elected to be law enforcers. We took an oath of office to protect the people. And we were able to work in a very collegial, nonpartisan, bipartisan way, bringing lawsuits, sometimes 50 states on one day simultaneously, that achieved consumer victories, put money back into the wallets and pocketbooks of people, enforcing the environmental laws that were being neglected. I mean, we had the head of the Antitrust Division who didn't believe in antitrust. He wanted to repeal the Sherman Act and the Clayton Act that had been the bulwark for antitrust enforcement for decades. So this was an opportunity for leadership on the part of attorneys. And so what happened was the attorneys general and the institution of Attorney General, which was historically a quiet backwater. We can talk a little bit about why I was so excited to be Attorney General, because it was a malleable office. And during my time, we helped shape it to become more affirmative. The Office of Attorney General was always defensive, defending the state when lawsuits were brought against the state. And now you had the chance of the Attorney General to be offensive, to launch investigations, to bring lawsuits, to clean up the environment, to bring lawsuits to protect consumers, to bring lawsuits to protect people's civil rights and liberties. And that was very, very exciting. And so that spilled over into the current era as well, when Donald Trump, like Reagan a few decades before him, began to retreat on enforcement by the federal government to protect people's rights. Attorneys General band together to protect immigrants, to protect consumers, to protect people against the environmental peril. So it was exciting then, and I think the office is exciting now. And everybody knows that an Attorney General is really a frontline protector of their rights. Wherever they live around the country, the Attorney General has emerged as a major official who can go forward and do things that are important in the daily life of the citizens of that state.
So I think we have another photograph, one that says, Bob Abrams, we need him now more than ever. I wonder if we can show that one. It seems like a perfect time on the back of that speech. We really need him now. It sounds like we still do, Bob. It sounds like we still do need you. But
well, I mean, there are some great guys out there, men and women who, feel as I do. First of all, I saw as a calling. Clergy, members of the clergy, religious leaders, they see their life's work as a calling. Members of the medical profession, healing, they see their life's work as a calling. Teachers, librarians, they see their work as a calling. I saw the opportunity to be in government as a calling. Mm-hmm. What could be more noble? What could be more important than somebody who takes an oath of office to enforce the Constitution of the state of New York and of the United States of America, and to work on behalf of the people in the public interest? And, I think there are people out there today who share that kind of view and that kind of value. And, I think that's very important, because this is, a great country, and it will remain great only if we have people out, at the barricades, saying, this country has to reach its potential. I used to say the job of the Attorney General is to translate laws, books. What good is a law in a book, in a bookcase, if it doesn't get enforced? If your rights are not protected, if you're being discriminated against on the basis of physical handicap, sexual orientation, religious background or belief, if you're not being protected as a consumer because a powerful company or corporation is abusing your powers and prerogatives because of monopolization, because of market power, because of false advertising, you're being ripped off in the marketplace. You buy a car and it's a lemon, and you're frustrated because you bring it back and the dealer won't deal with it and can't get it fixed for you. You need somebody to come and do the big battle for you. And the Attorney General had these powers that the Attorney General could do that. And so what was so exciting for me, it was the fact that I sought to maximize the powers of the office on behalf of individual people. It happens to be an office that can be shaped, that can be prioritized based upon the priorities of the office holder. I mean, I believed in a woman's right to choose. I know it's a sensitive issue. There are a lot of people who have views that are different from that, but that was my view, my belief. And so I wanted to maximize my opportunity to protect women so that they wouldn't be prevented from going into a clinic by those who would be blocking the doorway from them, so that they could be protected against laws that were intimidating and unfair and prevent them from exercising control over their own body. I was a pioneer on the whole gay rights issue. It was not very popular at that time, but I felt very deeply. I came from a background, of oppression, of religious discrimination, of my ancestors in Tsarist Russia. Here in this great country, we should have nobody suffer as a result of discrimination of any kind. And so, I used that office. I used the bully pulpit. I testified 35 times before the Congress. Nowhere in the statutes of New York does it say that the Attorney General should or has to go to Congress to testify. But I felt it was important to support a concept of a Superfund, federal government giving power, to the public interest to clean up toxic waste sites.
Let's
it was
talk
a
about
very
that.
exciting time.
One of the biggest cases that your office was very involved in was the Love Canal. In some ways, I think of that as the canary in the coal mine about climate change. It was an indication that if we abuse our environment, that it comes back to haunt us. Tell us a little bit about the Love Canal case and what you did and how it led to the Superfunds.
Well, when I was running in 1978, I was given a briefing paper about a community in Western New York, way up Niagara County. New York is a huge state, by the way, 62 counties, as you say, almost 20 million people, hundreds of miles between one part of the state and the other. The city of Jamestown is closer to the capital of Ohio than it is to the capital of New York and Albany. So way up in Western New York in Niagara County, I was reading about this community called Love Canal, where there was a problem. People were complaining that they were being poisoned. Their children were being poisoned as a result of toxic chemicals buried beneath homes that were built there. And I felt that if I became Attorney General, I would have to get involved in that matter. And in fact, I would want to do as much as I could to clean up that problem and that peril. And sure enough, I got elected and I sought to rebuild and strengthen the Environmental Protection Bureau in the Attorney General's office. And I got a person named Marsha Cleveland from the Natural Resources Defense Council, the NRDC, to come and head the Bureau. And we pursued and brought a lawsuit against Occidental Petroleum that we said created this problem. Over a period of years, 40 million pounds of toxic chemicals, murderous chemicals were placed in the ground, covered over with a thin layer of clay and some grass on top of it. 950 homes were built, 2 schools were built. It looked like a bucolic, beautiful, wonderful neighborhood. Little did the people know that underneath them were percolating chemicals, producing vapors and toxic fumes and contaminants that created miscarriages for women, asthma, epilepsy, cancer for children and others living in that community, playing in the backyards. And so even though we didn't have specific powers to do it, we used common law, the nuisance theory. You created a problem, you have to clean it up. We brought a lawsuit against the Occidental Petroleum Company. We testified in Congress saying there should be stronger laws, a federal law, and that was the genesis of the Superfund law. And in the end, we were able to clean up that site, to remediate those homes, and we were able to bring 65 other lawsuits throughout the state of New York and other communities that were suffering from the same peril. Never before I became Attorney General, there was never a lawsuit brought to clean up a toxic waste site. And so this was why I was an energized and excited Attorney General, because there were things you could do to truly protect people's lives.
Yeah, big progress. So let's talk about what was perhaps the most controversial episode that you were involved in your long journey in politics, the Tawana Brawley affair. What happened? What role did you play? How did that all happen? And if you care to comment, do you think that Al Sharpton's role in public life has evolved over time?
So the governor, Mario Cuomo, appointed me as a special prosecutor. A young, a Black African-American teenage girl, Tawana Brawley, made public some severe allegations that she was abducted by a group of white men, 4 to 6 white men, held against her will in the woods over a 4-day period. She was sexually abused and maligned. She was found with racial epithets on her body. When my wife and I read the article in the newspaper, first reporting that, we were appalled. We said, how could this be? How could this happen in America? How could this happen in New York? And I suspect that that was the reaction of everybody who read that article. As time went on, obviously those allegations had to be investigated. The family chose to pick 3 advisors, Al Sharpton, Alton Maddox, and Mason, to advise them. 2 were lawyers, and one was Reverend Al Sharpton, and they did not cooperate with the investigation at all, and they made all kinds of outrageous charges. And so, notwithstanding the lack of cooperation, we impaneled the grand jury, and we had extraordinary assistance by the FBI and the state police, and members of the community came forward and gave us evidence and testimony. The grand jury sat for months. We had over 6,000 pages of testimony, 180 witnesses, 250 exhibits, and we pieced together and found that tragically and unfortunately, this was not a correct story. It didn't add up. This girl fabricated the story. It was untrue. We pieced together all the information, the fact that there was never any finding of any sexual abuse, any harm to her. If she was held out in the woods over a 4-day period when it got very, very cold, there was no evidence of her being affected by the coldness. And we traced where she stayed in an apartment that was vacated by her family several months before, and that she placed herself in the very condition in which she found. She was seen walking into a plastic bag, and a neighbor had reported that and collected that. So, and Al Sharpton, made all kinds of outrageous statements with respect to that during the course of it. I think, frankly, to answer your question, he has changed over the years, and I see that he has, been involved in a very constructive way in many cases involving injustice to Black people who are members of the African American community who have been abused by police violence. I mean, the fact of the matter is that there is injustice. There are problems in the criminal justice system, and we really have to, as the George Floyd case, indicated, and we have to do things to strengthen our communities and be able to protect members of the African American community a lot better. But that case did not measure up to the truth.
Yeah. So in your long career, you crossed paths with many colorful New York politicians. One of the most colorful, surely, was Mario Cuomo. I think we have a photograph of you and Mario Cuomo, perhaps in a lighter moment. And some people will know that Mario Cuomo was once a semi-professional baseball player, so I admire your courage that you would go up against him in a baseball game. But tell us about your relationship with Mario Cuomo. What was it like to be Attorney General with such a strong personality in the governor's office?
Well, I think that photo was taken when Mario was Lieutenant Governor. And it was taken on Governor's Island. And there was a challenge to the Attorney General's office by the Lieutenant Governor's office. And we were very competitive, not only on the political battleground, but on the baseball diamond as well. I had, first of all, Mario Cuomo was a very gifted man. He was a brilliant guy. He's one of the great orators of the era. He inspired people, lifted their spirits, and lifted them from their seats when he made presentations. I think there was an atmosphere of mutual respect between the two of us, and there were also some clashes. And it wasn't personal; it was institutional. By definition, very often, the work of an attorney general comes in conflict with the work of a governor or a governor's agencies. When I got elected attorney general in 1978, there were 22 new attorneys general in the country. And the National Association of Attorneys General brought us all together in Scottsdale, Arizona, for a 3-day seminar to teach us about what we might expect being attorneys general. And I remember one of the sessions was by Bruce Babbitt. He was the governor of Arizona, and he was the former attorney general. And he focused on how institutionally there may be conflict between a governor and an attorney general. And that happened, to me from time to time when I was the attorney general with Governor Hugh Carey and when I was the attorney general with Governor Mario Cuomo. There were the good times, there were some tougher times. The governor had a proposal one time to institute sports betting and to fill a budget gap of $500 million. And, my staff and I said, wait a minute, you can't do this because gambling is prohibited in New York State unless there is a constitutional amendment. In 1938, there was an amendment to the Constitution for parimutuel racing. And in the 1960s, there was an amendment to authorize a lottery. And if you were going to do sports betting, you had to do it through a constitutional amendment. The governor didn't see it that way, but we issued a 28-page opinion, which carried the day. Actually, Warren Anderson said to the governor as they tried to pursue it, they said, well, what about the attorney general's opinion? So there were times when we were working together in a harmonious way, but there were other times when I had exercised my oath of office, do what my oath required me to do. And so in the book, I talk about how my relationship with Mario was up and down, but it wasn't personal. It was based upon, the roles that each of us had at that moment in time.
And do you have any reflections to offer on the current relationship between the Attorney General and the current governor? Letitia James, of course, finds herself in a position where she's investigating Andrew Cuomo. Any reflections on how she's going about that business and what it means for the people of the state?
Well, I think she's exercising tremendous courage and independence. When these allegations emerged of sexual harassment against the governor, I know there was an effort to conduct an investigation, bypassing the full control and power of the Attorney General. And Attorney General Tish James said, no, under the law, it's my responsibility and my authority to conduct this investigation. And she insisted that be the case, and that's the way it has emerged. She said that the governor has to give me full subpoena power and the opportunity to conduct a full and thorough investigation and issue a report at the end, and taking whatever steps that report dictates or requires. So I think Letitia James has exercised strength, independence, and a great deal of courage as well.
Well, Mr. Abrams, it's obvious that your many colleagues in Albany over the years have enormous respect for you. I say that because they named the courts in Albany after you. Perhaps we can show the picture of the Robert Abrams Building for Law and Justice. I can't think of a greater honor that one's colleagues could offer other than to name the building of law and justice after you for all the things you did as Attorney General. And with that, we're going to take some questions from the audience. I think, Mac, you're going to help us to identify some questions that people have asked, questions they had for General Abrams.
Yes, thanks, Mr. McNichol. Thanks, Attorney General Abrams. This has been fantastic, and there are a few questions I'll share with you from the Q&A now. The first from Jerry Albarelli. Jerry Albarelli asks, how are you able to run the Attorney General's office in a nonpartisan way?
Okay, well, the Attorney General of New York gets elected. So the Attorney General gets to his or her position through the electoral process. That's not the case in all states. It's very interesting. I mean, the Office of Attorney General started out to be an appointed office. And over the last 200 years, state constitutions met and converted the appointed office into an elected office. And most states today elect their attorneys general. There are a handful that don't. Small states, Wyoming, New Hampshire, Alaska, Hawaii, they have appointed attorneys general by the governor. New Jersey, a large state, is one of those states with an appointed attorney general. And there are two outliers. In Maine, the attorney general is selected every 2 years by a joint session of the legislature. And in Tennessee, the attorney general is selected by the Supreme Court for 8 years. So in New York, you get elected. And the question is, you know, how do you run an office in a professional, nonpartisan way when you really get to the office through the political process? Well, it's not easy, and it's not always done that way. But I was committed to professionalism and to excellence in the office, and I wanted to run a meritocracy. And I said, no one is going to get an appointment as an assistant attorney general through the patronage process. And I built in a whole structure and system of independence and merit and professionalism. I appointed for the first time a director of recruitment, and that person's job was to get resumes, and we got thousands of them, recruiting people, an interview process involving multiples of people to evaluate those people, never to ask what the political affiliation of the person was. I did something that never before happened in the history of the office. I barred people from contributing to my campaign. If you work for me, you or your spouse could not make a contribution to my campaign. And historically, in the Attorney General's office and in all the offices, other state offices, you know, those who are on the payroll contributed. The Attorney General or the office holder had a dinner. People sold tables to the dinner. I barred contributions. I barred people from working in my campaigns. I was the politician. Anybody who was an assistant attorney general had to be in the office and do the right thing. And it paid dividends. We attracted fantastic men and women. They didn't punch a time clock. They loved their job. They came to work early and they stayed late. They worked 6-7 days a week at the job. I was always moved how people left, a lot of men and women left their jobs in the private sector, taking huge cuts in salary. Sometimes they'd earn only a third of what they were earning in the private sector. Why would they do that? Because they were doing the people's work. They were doing important, constructive things. And so it wasn't easy, but I ran this office, you know, that way. And I was tested very often. There were a lot of examples. One time I was visited there was a vacancy in the Syracuse office, a vacancy as the head of the Syracuse office. And the mayor of Syracuse came down to see me with the Onondaga County Democratic chairman. He said, "This is the guy we want." And I had a talent scout go out and help me select people, find people for appointment. His name was Peter Yellen. And Peter said, "Bob, this guy is not for you. This is not the kind of guy we want to head the office." So I said, "So Peter, do we have an alternative?" He said, "Well, you know, I've asked around, I've gone around to district attorneys, to the Bar Association, and I can't find, you know, somebody at the moment." I said, "Well, then, you know, we got a problem here." So I said, I thought of something. I called up the dean of Syracuse Law School. I said, "Dean, I'm the new attorney general. I have an appointment to make, the head of the office. Maybe there's somebody on your faculty. Maybe there's somebody there who might enjoy running an office for the attorney general." He said, "Let me think about it." He got back to me 2-3 days later. He said, "There's a guy named Tom Maroney. He's an antitrust professor. I interviewed him. I loved him. I hired him. He did a fabulous job. Years later, few years after serving with me, the President of the United States appointed him the United States Attorney for that district. So there were many tests of my independence and my commitment to what I was trying to do, but I always tried to do the right thing, to run the office in a non-political way, in a professional manner, and always, and on the merits, you know, in terms of decision-making. I always told the people, I don't care who is on the other side of our investigation. I don't care how powerful that person is. I don't care what relationships that person has to people in this office, to me. I don't care if that person is a contributor to me. We're going to make every decision on the merits. The test is, what's the right thing to do? That's how we're going to make decisions in this office. Are we going to impanel a grand jury? Are we going to indict? Are we going to file a complaint? Are we going to launch an investigation? Are we going to point a finger? Are we going to issue a press release? It's all based on the question, what's the right thing to do? And that's a non-political way of running an office. And that's the way I try to do it for the 15 years I was AG.
Wow, thank you. Along those same lines, a question from Mickey Greenblatt, who identifies himself as a friend of yours from when you had hair. He asks, can you say something positive? I'm glad you laughed. He says, can you say something positive about any Republicans in office these days?
Well, first of all, I haven't heard that name in 40 years. Marshall Mickey Greenblatt was a member of my fraternity, Phi Sigma Delta, at Columbia. I had the privilege of serving as what they called MF, the Master Frata, the president of the fraternity. And Mickey Greenblatt came from Philadelphia, and I haven't heard his name or heard from him in, I don't know, 50, 60 years. So Mickey, let's get in touch with each other and talk with one another. I mean, I'm appalled at what's happening on the Republican side of things. I mean, the lack of courage to stand up and reject the lies that are taking place, the fealty, even after he's left office, of Donald Trump. It's just appalling to me. And today's report, you know, the threats made to Liz Cheney and to Mitt Romney, two Republicans who have had the courage to stand up and speak the truth. So I'm appalled. So there are two Republicans right there who are you know, coming from the right place, saying what has to be said. You know, Mitt Romney was the only vote for impeachment. Liz Cheney, I think she's third in command in the House. Her father was the vice president of the United States. She's got these impeccable conservative credentials, but she's speaking her conscience, and she's speaking, you know, to the truth. And she's being condemned by party loyalists for that, Trump loyalists for that. But hopefully she'll be joined by others, because one's got to believe there are more people than that in the Republican Party who's going to stand for the right thing.
And we have a compliment, a correction, and a question from the director of Roosevelt House, Harold Holzer. The compliment is to
let me just exert personal privilege here. I have no doubt what Harold is going to say, that I misrepresented Mario Cuomo. He actually was a professional baseball player, not semi-professional, but he played in the minor leagues. And I described that as semi-professional. I stand corrected.
Yes, and he also, you are correct. That's what Harold said. And he also pointed out, as we've all noticed, that Mr. Abrams, you have not lost a beat. You're amazing. And so his question to you, Attorney General Abrams, is, what is your biggest regret about your lucky career? I'm assuming it was the unlucky moment of your US Senate race.
Oh, yeah, you know, life, you can't win them all, you know. One door opens, another door closes. Sure, I would have loved to have won that Senate seat. Would have been a great honor. But you go on, you do other things. I went into the private sector, but still had a commitment to do pro bono work. And the book talks about a number of the things that I did in the public interest during the 25 years that I've been in private life. I guess in terms of regret, I was elected borough president of Bronx at a time of great stress for urban centers, great stress for the Bronx, the South Bronx. I tried my best. I worked very hard. I helped build Lincoln Hospital. I mean, a 554 bed institution on a 10-acre site, $200 million facility that was talked about for decades, and it never got built. And I built it, and I cited before the South Bronx High School and other things, but I didn't do enough probably to help stem the tide in the South Bronx. I guess I could have done more. Things now, decades later, I think there is a resurgence and things are coming back in the South Bronx and other parts of the Bronx. But for the most part, I feel that I've been a pretty lucky guy in a lot of ways. The life that I've led, the family that I have, the excitement that I've had and opportunity to serve at the 3 different levels of government, the way people have treated me in the public. I've won some, I've lost some, but I have no regrets. I consider myself, the luckiest guy in the world.
A question from Timothy Gills. Republican state legislatures around the country are considering and adopting various measures to reduce voter participation, especially among communities of color. What do you think is the best strategy for Democrats to follow to combat this?
Well, first of all, it's horrendous. I mean, it's appalling to see Republicans retreat on the whole issue of participation. I mean, when I got elected, one of the first things I did was, say that it's unfair to have hours voting in primaries only from 3 p.m. to 10 p.m. That's how I got elected, that limited window of time. I said a primary is just as important as a general election. We should have it from 6 o'clock in the morning till 9 o'clock at night, which is like the general election. So I was always for expanding the opportunity for the vote, having same-day registration, having absentee ballots, and and to see now Republican-controlled state legislatures, retreating, taking away the right of people in terms of the hours, in terms of the locations where they can place their ballots. To me, it's appalling. And I think what you got to do is to call out the situation. Stacey Abrams in the state of Georgia has been an extraordinary organizer to make sure that Georgia has led in terms of instituting some of these changes and reforms. And that kind of organizing has to be done all across the country to thwart these efforts. I applaud the president for speaking out in indicating to the public at large what's happening. And hopefully Republicans will see that there'll be a price to be paid if they continue to pursue this effort.
A colleague of mine has just informed me that I mispronounced that last name, Mr. Guliz. I apologize. Here's another question from Peter Geffen. Bob, what is it you think has happened to our country that has brought us to so much lower from the high standards and values, political and judicial, that characterize your service to our state and really our whole country?
Well, I don't know. I mean, take this immigration issue. I just can't fathom it. This country is a nation of immigrants. We all came from different places to come and live here, populate the country, work here to build the country. And immigrants are the lifeblood of this country. Somebody who's an immigrant is saying, I want to make the sacrifice of leaving my homeland, perhaps leaving members of my family, to come to start a new life in a land of opportunity. And what does that mean? There's tremendous desire to come here. And once here, they work hard to build the economy and to build the nation. That's been the history of this country. Who are the people who who are doing the construction jobs now. Go walk the streets of Manhattan, Queens, Brooklyn, early in the morning, see who's doing the heavy construction. They're immigrants, people who do the kinds of jobs too that many who are here, you know, deemed they don't want to do. They empty the bedpans in nursing homes and do the onerous jobs. Not to say that they are not entitled to come and rise and make it in this country to the highest levels. So I don't know. I think what happens, some of this xenophobia, it's greed. They don't want to share this country, the freedoms of this country, the bounty of this country. It's fear. They're afraid that maybe their place in this society is going to be threatened. But the reality is what history has shown us. There's room in this country for more. There is place for growth. There's place for opportunity within the educational system, within the economic system. And one just hopes that there is goodness in this country and it's going to prevail over the forces of darkness and evil.
If it's all right with you, I'll just do a couple more before we wrap up. Is that okay?
I'm getting a little weary. I just came from 2 weeks in Israel and a few days of jet lag, and I think I've shown it in answering some of these questions in a long-winded way. But I'm game. I'm here. Go for it.
Let's do 2 more, Mac. Just 2.
Okay, thanks. So here's one from Reinhold McNichol. He wonders if you ever worked at any point with Roscoe Brown or Ralph Nader, and if so, on what?
Yeah, Roscoe Brown was a great leader of the Bronx. He at one time was the president of Bronx Community College, and he was a great hero in the armed services of our country. And I loved Roscoe. He was great. Ralph Nader. He was the greatest name in consumer protection when I was Attorney General. I remember, you know, I was committed to have enforcement of the antitrust laws. Antitrust laws started at the state level. The first state to pass an antitrust statute was Kansas. And then the feds came along and they became the dominant enforcers. And people began to say, well, states have no role in antitrust. It was really the federal government that was viewed as the enforcer of state antitrust. But as a result of what happened in the Reagan years, and I and other attorneys general stepped into the breach, we had stronger enforcement of antitrust laws. We began to be a co-equal force for antitrust enforcement. I saw during my term as president of the National Association of Attorneys General that it was going to be the 100th anniversary of antitrust. And so I called my Republican friend in Kansas, Bob Steffen, and I said, let's have a 100th anniversary event, and let's try to get as the keynote speaker, Ralph Nader. Had no idea whether we'd be able to get him. And we sent him a letter, and he came and he spoke, and he was terrific. There were some things later on in his career that I didn't quite agree with. And, you know, he was running for president and seeking to take away votes from the major party Democratic candidate, giving a Republican a chance and whatever. But certainly he was an extraordinary person, showing great strength and independence as a consumer protector.
I'll just mention that to the audience that everyone should click into the chat and find a link to purchase a copy of The Luckiest Guy in the World from Shakespeare and Company. Please do that before we finish up here in a couple minutes. The last question is just to tell us a word about the experience of writing the book and what it is you would hope for a reader to take away from your book.
Okay, well, that's an interesting question. So I didn't start out writing the book. I'm a lucky guy because I have 2 daughters and 8 grandchildren. And those grandchildren range in age from 2 to 22. And none of them were on the earth when I was in public service. So I said to myself, you know, maybe I should put down on paper some of the things that I did when I was in public life. So for these grandkids to know about. So I worked with a brilliant oral historian from Columbia. He had me speak into the microphone and he'd give me transcripts and I edit the transcripts. And after a while, after a few episodes and hours of this, it started to look like a book. So I began to put it together as a book. And then it became too long when I tried to publish the book, including this publisher. I had 188,000 words. They said, "Are you kidding me? No one's going to read a book that's 188,000." So I had to sign a contract that said that I would produce a book that had 75 to 85,000 words. And that's what this book has. So 1 out of every 2 pages, 1 out of every 2 words is on the cutting room floor, has been cut out of the book. But hopefully there's still enough good stuff in there to warrant somebody to go and take the time to read it. And hopefully there's some messages. What are the messages? That ordinary people can prevail against great odds. You can run as an insurgent against the party machine, against the big bosses. You can be a consumer and be able to win. You can be somebody living in a neighborhood and not be afraid to turn on the tap, that you're going to be poisoned because the aquifer that provides water for your home is being contaminated by dangerous toxic chemicals that are coming in contact with water supply. You can win battles, you can win fights. This is still a great country. It's an open society. And I guess those are some of the themes and messages that emerge, that good guys can win and that you can battle against great odds and be victorious.
Well,
That's great.
Attorney General Robert Abrams, thank you so much. Thank you so much for taking the time to write the book, for having the insight that there was a book there. I'm sure that historians will benefit from the other 100,000 words as they go through the archives at Columbia's Oral History Project, where I've done some of my own research. So thank you for that as well. And again, Robert Abrams, The Luckiest Guy in the World, My Journey in Politics. It's a great book. I've read every word of it and enjoyed it thoroughly. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us tonight.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you.